Begin the current Daf Mesech Nazir Daf Nun Gimel. Begin 9 lines Daf at the top of the Yomid, where the Gemara continues a related discussion from our previous Daf, which related to the halacha of the Mishnah, which we're discussing all these different items that are matama lemes specifically for the halacha of Nazir. As actually our Gemara is going to contrast that with the halacha of in general of Tumah, which, as we said in the Mishnah, it's a halacha Mishnah, specifically the measurements that are matame that the Nazir is migalech in contrast to just in general becoming tameh. Turn to today's daf. So discussing today's daf are machlekes regarding the amounts of atzamis, the amounts of dam that are metameh for the glachas, naziris, and achilas truma b'kachim, which those could be possibly different. Machlekes regarding al-evim and the al-evim and the chai, veinelim basikar between machlekes Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg. If you have a limb from a dead person, a limb from a live person, which our Mishnah had said that the halacha is if it has what's called yeshalim basikaro, it has a amount of flesh that it can regenerate if it was connected to a living person. What would happen if it doesn't have? What's that halacha over there? Now, that's sometimes made some tame regarding tummy for other matters that the bones are matame oil when they are a quarter of a kav. Our Gemara is going to describe that regarding teklachas naziris, nazis megalech only if the bones equal a half of a kav. As says in the Mishnah, that's halacha meshbezinai. Although you're tummy even with a quarter, but for teklachas to have to cut off here and start over, that's a half. Now, nazis megalech only when that summits are either mereva binyan or mereva minyan. That's in general. However, if the chatzi kav at summits of the shedra v'gagailis, so nice megalechim when they're not reva minyan, reva binyan. The halacha of etzim kaseira, the bone the size of a barley corn, which is not matam oil, but is matam b'maga ubamasa. So we begin the current daf, daf nun gimel, 9 lines down from the top of the amid. The Gemara quotes Amr Rabbi Eliezer regarding this halacha of our Mishnah. So zikenim harishainim, the earlier elders. Some of them said as follows: that chatzi kav atzama is a half of a kav of atzamas. The chatzi like dam and a half a like of dam is lakoil, meaning for all halachas that even for the tumah of oihel, there's going to be a halacha of tumah whether for nazir or for truma or for kachim only with a half a kav, which is disagreeing with the Mishnah of Masechta Sa'alos that we've quoted in the past that said that it's going to be even a quarter of a kav or a quarter of a leg of dam. No, it has to be specifically a half of a kav. So that's a leniency. You're only going to have the tumah if it has a half a kav. So not only for Nazir, as we said in our Mishnah, the some of these zikanim held that for everything it's going to be half a leg or half a kav. Now, some of them said the opposite extreme, that af reva atzamos, that even a quarter kav of bones or a quarter of a leg of blood is, even for Nazir, is like koil. So the zikanim, those other zikanim, they disagree on our Mishnah. So we have these two different opinions regarding the halacha. Where again, in Masechtas Alis, the Mishnah said that the tumah for other matters is a reva kav atzamas revi zadam. Our previous Mishnah said naz megalech and chatzi kav atzamas chatzi leg of dam, which again, from the Zikanim Rishainim, they're on opposite extremes. Some said that for everything it's chatzi kav atzamas chatzi like dam, so that includes teklach and zis and truma kachim. And miktas naimim, no, everything is revias, which is even for naziris. So this miktas are not like the Mishnah Alas, and this miktas of reva is not like our Mishnah, which said that for nazir it's a half a kav. Now, bezn shalachareyim amru. The later courts, they came along and they said it's somewhere in the middle. Chatzi kav atzamas v'chatzi loig dam lakoil. Meaning, when we say lakoil, we mean even for nazir, like we learned in the Mishnah, that it's only going to have the halacha of teglachas only if it's a half a kav and half a leg. Roiva atzamas urevias dam, when there's even just a quarter of a kav of bones or a quarter of a leg of dam, that's l'truma and v'kadishim, where if a person leans over them or is in the same room as them, is going to be tamei, as we learned in the Mishnah, in Mesechtes, always. Avaloyla nazir, but not for nazir, like our Mishnah. Our Mishnah held that it's not enough for the revias for the halacha of nazir. And va'isa pesach, which, meaning if you're going to be considered as tamei to do the carbon pesach, that's halacha meshmesinai, which essentially they hold like our Mishnah, that a nazir is not megaleach on that at all. And they also like the Mishnah always. Because the Mishnah they're taught that there's a tumah of oil in general for truma and kachim, where that's how this last courts they held, like the Tana of our Mishnah and the Tana in the Mishnah Mesechtes Alis. Now the Gemara wonders and says, wait, Mechti, let's see. In achras shlishis machras. The third opinion is not a machriya, meaning someone explained that the achras shlishis, these were the students, that the later courts were students of the earlier zikanim. The Gemara is asking that, wait a second, you don't really have a third opinion that's tilting the machlekes. Meaning, the Mishnah over here and the Mishnah over the Masechtas Alos, you want to say that's like the Bezdin, they hold like the later Bezdin, but the inference would be that it would seem like the halacha is following them. As we see, our Mishnah and Mishnah Alos is like that because they're the machriya. But the problem is, they're not being machriya, meaning, the machriya means to say that you have one person saying A, one person saying B, and then you have person number 3 says either one or B. So that would be tilting it. But here, the third opinion is not A or B, it's C. It's its own opinion because the earlier Zikanim, they didn't reveal their intention that there should be any differentiation between Nazir and Isa Pesach to Truma Kodshim. So you're making this chilik, it's not a hachra. So why would we say, like the Tamidim Achareihem, it's not a machriya? So the Gemara says, you're right. Really, we shouldn't paskin like the Tamidim, because they're not really being machriya, they're saying a third opinion. But Rabbi Yaakov Eidi says, "Mepi Shmu Amr." We said over from tradition, "Mepi Chagi Zechari Malachi," from the Nevi'im, Chagi Zechari Malachi, which and therefore the Bezdin Shel Achreinim relied on their teaching to make the halacha like them, and therefore the Mishnah over here in the Mishnah Alis is like this Bezdin Shel Achreinim, not because of being machriya, but simply because it was a tradition from the Chagi Zechariah and Malachi. The halacha of the Mishnah. So he said in the Mishnah that Al Elu HaNazir Megalech. Okay, so we said on these things the Nazir is Megalech, which we said this 2 times. We opened up the Mishnah saying Al Elu Nazir Megalech, and we ended on the end. So when you say Al Elu, it says like as if on this, it's excluding something else. So what is it excluding? So says the Gemara Al Elu the Reisha, when it says on these in the Reisha, that's Lamute Etzem Kesa'ira. That's coming to exclude when you have a bone the size of a barley corn, where the Almagoy v'Amasai in. That yes, for touching and for caring, that will have the halacha of tiklachas that the nazar has to start over. But for the halacha of oil, etzem kesar does not have that. Now says Taisus, what do you mean? Why would I need al elu to exclude the case of etzem kesar? The Mishnah explicitly talks about etzem kesar later on, and it says that although all the items I said up until now applies to oil, but magoy masai, that is only by etzem kesar, but it sounds like al hiloi. No, says Taisus, okay. That's what's called Tani v'Hadim Mefarish. Al Elu is coming to exclude that of the Esem Gesaycha, and then Hadim Mefarish that explains it with the halacha explicitly in the Mishnah. Similarly, the Gemara says Al Elu the Seifa, when it says Al Elu again at the end of the Mishnah, that is coming to exclude the Ma'ute Even Haschuchis, which are many different interpretations of Rishonim. The way Taisa says it is that from the term of Seicha, like Schach, if you have a stone that's leaning over the ground, and there's 2 or 3 stones coming out of the wall, and there's tumah beneath one of them, and the person goes beneath one of the stones, and it doesn't know if it was halal or tumah, that's the case that we're saying that that's not going to have the halacha of tumas oil. Which says is a little bit difficult, because the seif of the Mishnah, meaning the next Mishnah, talks about explicitly that avoschaches uparayis, these are the overhangs and these protrusions, in megalech. So why would I need to have al elu of our Mishnah to be inferring that it wouldn't have a tumah oil when the next Mishnah explicitly says it? Says Taisa, what you have to say is that this is also like I just answered before, that Tani v'Hadim Mefarish, like Etzem Kesa'ira, that's from Rabbeinu Peretz, that, in the Chanami. The Mishnah will ultimately say it explicitly, but still the Mishnah says it with al elu to exclude it, and then v'Hadim Mefarish explains it explicitly. Now we said in the Mishnah, v'chatzi kav atzamais. Another case was, a half a kav of bones is one of the cases that you're going to have the Nazir cut off his hair and start over again. So as you continue to Beis, the Gemara says, chatzi kav atzamas in. So it sounds like that a half a kav of bones, yes, rev atzamas loy, but a quarter of a kav of bones, then not. So says the Gemara, heichedami, what's the case talking about by the quarter of the kav of the bones? What's the question? So the Gemara says, if it has in it a bone the size of a barley corn, what do you mean? Typically, you should have to do the teglachas because of the bone the size of a barley corn. Which Taisa says, what's the Gemara's question? We're talking about regarding oil. Regarding oil, we're saying it has to have a chatzi kav of a tzamis, but a quarter of a kav wouldn't have. And etzem kisa'ira, so even if it has a bone the size of a barley corn, it's still not going to be tam oil. So what's the Gemara's question? So Taisus is a very interesting answer. He brings in the Ri. The Gemara's question is relying on what the Gemara wants to shortly say. Because once we said in the Reisha, the halacha of Chatzi Kav, that's when the halacha is going to be of Tiglachas, it sounds like. But less, no. Then you won't have the halacha of Tiglachas. So then why did you need to say in the Sefer of the Mishnah that by Roivat Samais, when there's a quarter of Kav of bones, meaning the Sefer is the next Mishnah on Daf Nadalad, that the Nazir is not Megalech on that? So the Gemara is going to shortly answer that we're coming to tell you the inference that, less than a half a Kav, you're not going to do Tiglachas on Ahiloi, on oil, but you will do on Mage and Masa of a quarter of a Kav. So if that's the case, comes out that the primary Chiddush of our Mishnah is really coming to tell you that on Magoi and Masai, you would be Megalech on a quarter of a Kav. So therefore, that's what the Gemara is being Medaik right now. So it's obvious that on less than a half a Kav, you would be Megalech on Magoi and Masai. So that's what the Gemara is asking. Like, wait a second. That's what I need to tell you, Chatzi Kav, to tell you the inference that a quarter of Kav, you wouldn't do it for oil, but you would do it for Magamasa? Typically, Misham Etzim Kesayra. What do you mean? You have to do Tiglachas for Magamasa for Etzim Kesayra? I don't need a quarter Kav of bones for that. I can have a bone the size of a barley corn. That, says Tosfos, is the Gemara's question. It's like based on the inferential idea that I know already from Chatzi Kav that says by the quarter of a Kav, it would be. But why do I need that to have etzem kesayra? So the Gemara says that's not difficult. El de ikmach ikmuche. That's talking about where the quarter of a kav of bones will grind it down very thin, like flour or like dust. Where in such a situation you wouldn't have tumah because etzem kesayra. You don't even have a bone the size of a barley corn. That's what we're coming to tell you. But you would have tumas maga because of a roiva kav of bones. Okay. The next case in the Mishnah was al aver min ames, regarding the limb of a dead person, and the limb of a living person. If it has the amount of flesh that could regenerate, so then it's going to have a halacha of tumah in the oil, and it's going to have to cut off all his hair. Now, says the Gemara, what's if ein alein basa karo mai? What's the halacha? Let's say this Aver min Ames did not have the amount of flesh that could regenerate. In other words, as Tosfos explains, most definitely in the oil, you're not going to have to cut off your hair, as we learned in the Mishnah, because specifically only have basa karo. But regarding touch, regarding carrying, what's called magamasa, and there is no bone the size of barley corn, that's our question. Okay. So Rabbi Yechon Amar, he says, Eina Nazir megalech alein. No, Nazir does not have to cut off his hair for them, and since it doesn't have a bone the size of a barley corn. Shloka says, no, a Nazir megalech alein, the Nazir has to cut off his hair for it, meaning for touching it and for carrying it, even though it does not have a bone the size of a barley corn, and it doesn't have basa karo that can amount of flesh that can regenerate, and it's not considered an aver to have tumas oil, but still it's considered to have tumah for maga masa, as Rish Lakish is later on going to darshan from Psukim, as the Gemara explains. He says, no, the Nazir does not have to cut his hair for this aver min hachai or aver min hames that doesn't have basa karo. Why? Let's look at the words in the Mishnah. Mishnah said, al aver min hames, what are the cases that Nazir is migalech? The limb from a dead person, the limb from a living person, b'chul, etc. And the Mishnah said in the Girsa takes the word kazaya shesh alein basar, that if it had basar karo, then yes. Aval ein aleim, but if it doesn't have basar karo, it doesn't have flesh to regenerate, then loy. Then you don't have to do any tiglachas. Even though our Mishnah is talking about oil and here we're talking about magamasa, but still that's Rabbi Yechon and Medayik. The only if it's basar karo, then you're going to have tiglachas, but not, then not. Shimon Lakish says, no, megalech. You're going to have to cut off the hair. Why? What's his raya? Midaloi katani b'seifa, because the next Mishnah, which we call the Seifa, in the cases of, let's say, if you see on Daf Nundal, when it says Abaschachas and Brois, the next Mishnah starts off and saying, yes, but the overhangs and the protrusions, and the Aver she'ein alav basa karo, it doesn't say. It doesn't say, and flesh that doesn't have, and a limb that doesn't have flesh, appropriately, that also by maga masa, you're not going to have to cut off your hair. It doesn't say that. It says a bunch of cases in the Sefer, that those cases you don't have this halacha. Why doesn't it say this inverse the way it does for a lot of the cases of the Reisha. That's what the Sefer does. It says, oh, those in the Reisha because it had the right amount of shiur, etc. But the Sefer doesn't. It doesn't say in the Sefer. The inference is yes, because the Magamas actually would be Tami. And you would have to do Teglachas the way Rabbi Shlokker is going to darshan shortly from a pasuk. So therefore, that's his raya from the Sefer that it would have with Magamasa, even if it doesn't have Basik Karo. Now, Rabbi Yechon Malach, he would tell you that no. Kalhecha de Mishma Mechlolo. Anyway, we could understand it from inference. Loi Katani B'Sefer. We're not going to say it in the Sefer, so there's no deek from the fact that the Sefer didn't mention it. Because as Taisa explains, this that we said in the Reisha, Al Evim in Ames, Al Evim in Achai, a limb from a dead person or from a living person, Shishla Basiko, that has amount of flesh to regenerate. And we don't say, but if it doesn't have Basiko for Maga and Masa, that you're still going to be Megaleach, from the fact that it doesn't say that, obviously, that you're not Megaleach, even on the Maga and Masa, if it doesn't have Basiko, and therefore you don't need to say it anymore in the Sefer. Shimon Lakish says that no, wherever that you could hear from the inference of the Reisha, and you don't say in the Sefer, so then that is a diak. But Rabbi Yechon holds that no, you didn't have to say it in the Sefer because you understand it already from the Reisha that it wasn't mentioned, and therefore that's where they disagree about if you could be medaik from that Mishnah or not. Now the question the Gemara asked, but Vaha in the Reisha we learned that what did our Mishnah say? What we call the Reisha? It said chatzi kav atzamas, a half a kav of bones. Now the mashmat sounds like chatzi kav atzamas in a half a kav of bones. Yes, you're going to have to. Nuz is going to have to cut up his hair and start over. Dreiv atzamas loy, but a quarter of a kav of bones, then no. And even so, b'kutani b'seifa, what we learn in the seifa, meaning in the next Mishnah on Daf Nun Daled, we learned dreiv atzamas. In other words, according to Rabbi Yechon, who says that when you could infer something, you don't have to say it in the Sefer, and therefore he was saying that, Rish Lakish, what's your raya? You didn't have to say it in the Sefer because I already know from the Reish. But what do you mean? Don't you know, let's pick another case, of bones. You know Chatzi Kav, that means not Reiva, so why are you saying in that Mishnah, Reiva Tzamis? Says Gemara, no, Hassam, says Rabbi Yechon, there, Ilav Reiva Tzamis, if I didn't tell you that quarter of a kav of bones would not have the halacha of Tiklachas, I would have said, Afilah Magoy V'Masoiloi, that even if you touch it or carry it, it wouldn't have the halacha of being megalech. Therefore, I have to teach you the quarter of a kav of bones to tell you dalahilan who is megalech. It's only for the halacha of oil that it does not megalech. But magamasa actually would be megalech, and therefore I have to say the case. The Gemara says, but what are you saying? There's other cases also that seem unnecessary, Rabbi Yechanan. Because b'chatzi lug dam, what do you do with the case of a half a lug of blood? The shaman minah, which our Mishnah said, half a lug of blood, then the Nazir is going to become tummy, so you have to cut it and start over. Now, the Shaman, obviously you infer from that, the chatzi lug dam, in. That's only half a lug of blood, yes, but Rabbi is dam lai. Quarter of a lug of blood, no. Now, by the time you say Rabbi is dam, but still this next Mishnah says Rabbi is dam. Didn't you tell me if you know it already from the Reisha, there's no dig, and you don't have to say in the Sefer? Says Gemara, no, Hasam afukim Rabbi Kiva. We had to say it, even though, yes, we know from Mishnah, because we had to exclude from the opinion of Rabbi Kiva. Because Rabbi Kiva, he says, Revi'as dam. The Girsa takes out the next words, just Revi'as of dam. Meaning, we had to exclude from Rekiva, who says in the end of the parak that just for a quarter of a leg of dam, for maga masi within megalech, our Mishnah held that no, it always has to be a half a leg. So that's why we had to say it, even though seemingly it would be a meduik from the Reisha. But the Gemara asks and says, wait a second, hi Evim and Hameis. This that we said, that this limb from a dead person that does not have basa kodor, does not have amount of flesh to regenerate, which we said is a machlekes between Yechon and Shlakish, if the Nazir Megalech for Magamas or not, says the Gemara, Hechidami. So the Gemara wants to understand this machlekes. And what's the question? So the Gemara explains. If it has a bone the size of a barley corn, which the question is, Zamai Tamid Rabbi Yechanan. What's the reason Rabbi Yechanan that he says the Nazir not Megalech Maga Masa? What do you mean? Pashut for Etzem Kisa'ira has halacha of Tiglachas. And the less by Etzem Kisa'ira, if it doesn't have a bone the size of a barley corn. So my time Rish Lakish, what's the reason Rish Lakish that he holds that it is? What? There's no Aver over here because it doesn't have Basik Ro, and there's no Etzem Kisa'ira. So what's Pshat Rish Lakish? So Rish Lakish would tell you the truth is the less by Etzem Kisa'ira. You're right. We're talking about that there's no bone the size of a barley corn. Still, the Torah includes that it will have the halacha of Nazir b'megalech. Why? Because the time we learn the brayso that's including the halacha of tumah from a dead person. Because the pasuk says in Bamidbar Perek Tes pasuk Tezayin, it says v'chola sheyiga, and whatever will touch al panei asada, on the surface of the field, b'chal cherev, he who is slain by the sword, or b'meis, or in a dead person. And the pasuk there continues, or in the bone of man, or in the grave. Yid Mashavas Yom, it becomes 7 days and becoming in contact with a dead person. So Rosh Lakish shows you how we darshan the words over here in the pasuk, which shows the source of his halacha. The words al panei hasada, what is that? What do you mean on the face of the field? Zahamal al panei hames. This is someone who leans over the face of the dead person. As Taisa explains, for the fact that it doesn't just say basada yiga b'mes, rather it says al. What's al panei? Oh, that sounds like that he's leaning over what's called oihel. As the Gemara says in the first parak in Shabbos, that they make him tamei because of kalim that leaning over the mess. What it means to say is, even if they're not on it, meaning even if the kalim are not on the mess and the mess not on the kalim, even if this guy is just leaning over, it's going to make him tamei. That's one drasha. It's not the main thing we want. But chalal, when it says chalal, what's that teaching us? So the word chal also means that which is disconnected. This refers to the limb of a living person. The yesh leilahal saruch, and it has enough flesh that it can regenerate. So that's what it sounds like. It sounds like a limb that fell off from the body of a living person and it got cut off. That's teaching that halach from the word chalal. When it says b'chalal cherev, what I have to say that was slain by the sword, to tell you that harei ze kachal, a well-known Talmudic teaching, the cherev harei kachalal, that it says b'chalal cherev, the sword is like the dead person, meaning a metal vessel that touches a dead person becomes an avi avos hatuma. It becomes the grandfather of tuma, the way the mess itself is, to contaminate a person that touches it, a tuma of 7 days, like touching the dead person himself, or to be matami a person that comes into the oil that the cherev is inside. Just like a dead person, if that sword is there, it's also going to be tummy 7 days, like as if it's coming to oil ames. Then when the pasuk says oy b'meis, or if it comes in contact with a dead person, this refers to a limb that is detached from a dead person, and there's an amount of flesh that it can regenerate, what's called a hal sarucha, which is considered like the dead person himself. Then the pasuk continues, oy be'etzem adam, or the bone of man. This refers to a quarter of a kav of bones, which it contaminates ba'oihel, which Allah seen that you need to have a quarter of a kav, and the pasuk is just what's called nasmachta, because you don't see anywhere in the pasuk a quarter of a kav, but it's Allah Sinai. Oy bekever, or in the grave, ze kever sasim. This refers to a sealed grave, because as the Gemara continues, top of Nandal Manav, Damamar, like the Master says, that Tuma bekaz va'olam. Tuma shoots forth and goes up from the grave, and bekaz v'yiredis, and it shoots forth and goes down from the grave. That is what's called a kever sasim, a sealed grave. Now, Tais explains that don't say that it means that there's no opening, there's no ear space of a tefach in the grave, because that's actually what's known as the Mishnah, as the Gemara teaches in Chulin, it's called tumah retzutza, crouching tumah. There actually, it's only matame, only directly opposite the body of the corpse of the dead person. Here we're talking about that the grave itself, that's why it says kever, the grave itself is matame, even not opposite the dead person. So what are we talking about over here? Kever sasa means to say that it's sealed from all the sides, and there is a gap of a tefach between the walls and the dead person, which is different than tumah retzutza, which the grave itself contaminates ba'oil, even if it's in the same oil, even shaloi keneged, I mean if you're leaning over, even shaloi keneged ames. And that's how it's brought in the Sifri. When it says in the pasuk, oy bekever, ze kever sasam, what does that mean? So the Sifri explains that's matama on all sides, even the empty part of the grave. Now specifically, if there's what's called paiseach tefach, there's an opening of a tefach between the dead person and the grave that's on top of him. But if it doesn't have paiseach tefach, then it's actually not going to be matama on all sides. Then tumah is going to shoot forth and go up only directly opposite the dead person. That's directly opposite the dead person. Now, Rabbeinu Shimshon, he brings a raya from the 7th parak of Olas that nefesh atuma, which is a sealed grave, if you touch it from the sides, the Mishnah says tar is going to be tar. Why? Because the tumah is bekas v'oil, it shoots forth and goes up. Bekas v'rad, it shoots forth and goes down. Now, but it says, Im hoya makam hatumah tefach al tefach. If the area of the tumah was a tefach squared, then it's going to be tamei because it's kekever sasim. Then it's like a sealed grave. So you see that the sealed grave is more severe and it's metame from the entire area of the grave. Says Taisus, where do the Gemara brachas Daf Yomi Beis that says that the reason why they were allowed to jump over the graves to see the kings was because Reva Reinis Yeshben Pesach Tefach, most coffins have a space of a tefach. So Taisus, what you have to say is that those graves were open from the side. So therefore it didn't have halach of a kever sasim, wasn't sealed from all sides, because it's only if all sides are sealed. As the Mishnah teaches in Alis in the third parak, Bivshu kamach tech zabayis, if you have pipes that are covered beneath the house, if it has a pesach tefach, and where it comes out as pesach tefach, if tum is inside of it, the house is going to be tahar. It's only going to be if it has sealed on all sides, then it has halacha of a kever sasim. Now, Tais parenthetically just mentioned that the Gemara is quoting the Amamar, Tumah Bakas Va'ila, Tumah shoots forth and goes up. That was parenthetical, because that's actually not talking about a kever. That Tumah Bakas Va'ila is actually not what we're mentioning over here. That's actually like by Tumah Ritzutza, where it shoots forth and goes up. Here we're saying that the whole grave, and additionally, the grave over here is Matama even Shaloi Keneged Tumah. The halach of Bakas Va'ila is usually mentioned in the context of only the dead person shooting up and shooting down. So it's not really what we're talking about over here when we're saying Bakas Va'ila, because this is just parenthetical, bring up the halacha. But here when we're saying Oy Bekeva Zekeva Sasam, that refers to the whole area of the grave. Now, the Gemara continues and says, okay, now we didn't finish yet the proof of what Rish Lakish wants to bring over here. The Gemara continues and says, now Ve'ilu Gaba Negiya, this was all regarding like oihel. But regarding touching, Amar Yehuda says, Tanya learned in the Brisa that the pasuk says in Bamidbar, it says that a person should take an azov, a hyssop, dip it in water, pure person, spray it on the oil, on all the vessels, on the fashes that were there, and as our Gemara quotes the pasuk, the gear says, V'al hanegea be'etzem b'chol, whoever touched a bone or a dead person, or a bemes, or a dead person, or a bekever, or a grave, he has to be purified, which we know that's the paraduma, ash waters, which you take the azev and you spray it on the person. So from this pasuk, as the Gemara quotes, these are all drashas regarding maga. I mean, the pasuk we just brought before were regarding oihel. Now we're going to bring regarding maga, regarding touch. It says in the pasuk, V'al hanegea be'etzem b'chol, whoever touches the bone or in the slain person, what does this pasuk come to drasha? So be'etzem in the bone, the etzem gives the oira. So you see the drashas here are being different. The drashas we had up until now were saying different things that are going to have the tumah of a mess, like we said of tumas oil. Now we're talking about a different, very different pasuk, which is talking about actually by the purification process, but we're going to make drashas from these words also to say what's included in this halacha of maga. So when it says be'etzem in the bones, the etzem gives is a bone the size of a barley corn. Oy b'chalal, or in a chalal. So, although it generally simply translates as a slain person, but ze'eva nechel benachai. There's a limb that was detached from a living person. Ve'ein boy lahalas arucha, and it doesn't have enough to regenerate. Remember, if it has enough to regenerate, it has tumas oil. Here we're talking about regarding maga, that it doesn't have enough to regenerate. Oy b'meis, or in a dead person, ze'eva nechel min ha-meis. This refers to a limb that's detached from a dead person. That's, some girsayis have the words ve'ein boy lahalas arucha. And as Taisa has the girsah that, and it doesn't have enough to regenerate. An oy bekever, or in the grave, of a Rish Lakish, he says, what's that coming to include? Zekever shalifnei hadibur. This refers to a grave before Matan Torah. So Taisa says, Tzarachian, according to Rabban and Rabbi Shimon, that they say in Yevamos Daf Samach Aleph, that even graves of idol worshippers are metama ba'oil, because they don't have the drasha of Adam Atem Kurim Adam, and B'nai Noach are not called Adam. So why do you need the drasha of Oy Bekever to include those before Matan Torah? They're not any less than B'nai Noach, who anyways have Tumas Oil. So why do you have to have this drasha? So you have to say, yeah, it's Reb Shimon, it's not Rabbanan. Reb Shimon holds that there's no Tumah of Kvar Kiver Oy Dekachavim Ba'oil. So therefore, it's according to him that you have to have this drasha. But Tzai says it's difficult because over here, by touching is where the pasuk is said, not regarding oil. Shimon agrees that kivri of the gechav matam b'maga masa, as Ravina says in Perikabaya Vimta over the end of Samach Aleph. And it's a deichi to say not like Ravina. So even Reb Shimon that you want to say it's like, he only just says kivri of the gechav matam ba'oil, but b'maga masa he agrees. So this pasuk like we said is telling you regarding maga. So why would you even need him according to Reb Shimon? So the Riva explains that when we say kever shalifnei hadibur, we mean also those who died, and the Girsa should be after Ma'an Torah, before the parasha of Tumas Mes was said. So what's that coming to tell us? Because I would have thought to say, it says in the Torah, Adam ki yamus ba'ayil, when the man will die in the ayil, which tells us only from that parasha on onward do they have this halach of Tumah. So once the Torah was given, then they don't have the halacha of just tam, and the Torah is telling you, but it's only yamas that he will die. If he died already before the parasha was said, then maybe you would have thought to say it doesn't have this halacha. Therefore, you have to have a special ribui of oiba kever. Says Taisa, and you find similarly in the Gemara and the last parak in Hariyas, that requires a pasuk for a zav shalafnei hadibur, if it was before that this halacha was said. And the reason for that is because it says in the pasuk, ish ki yeh zav mebsaveh. Any man that there will flow from his flesh, which sounds like Mikam Ba'elach, so you need a special reboot. Says Taisa, that's the same thing over here. But then says Taisa in general that there are those who ask a question, they say, according to Rabbi Shimon, that says that only Bnei Yisrael have the Tumah of Kivri, of Kvarim. So why did Rebbeinu demarcate where the Ma'ar Samachpela was, as the Gemara brings above a Bas Nun Ches, but Avram Avinu, Adam, they will all be from Matan Torah, which according to Rabbi Shimon is not Matam Ba'oil. And the first Pegmar Cut of Haim and Aleph says that we only demarcate, put a marker on something that's Matam Ba'oil. So according to Rabbi Shimon, why did he have to define where Mar Samach Bela was? So the Riva says that, no, you're right. Even though it's only B'nai Yisrael, the Matam Ba'oil and the Kever, but Adam Arishan is called Adam Atam. You know, if anyone's called Adam, you're called Adam, B'nai Yisrael, Adam is Adam. And Avram, Adam HaGodol Ba'anakim, even though he was before Mantera, he definitely has the halacha of like B'nai Yisrael. Or another approach is that he holds that when we including in our Gemara kever shalifnei hadibur, we're going to include also a kever that was before the dibur of Matan Torah, which includes Adam and Abraham. So therefore, that's where we're including these individuals. So therefore, they have the tumah. Now, the Gemara continues and says, okay, so we quoted this whole teaching, both by oil and by maga, but now the Gemara has to conclude what Rish Lakish is trying to say. Remember, Rish Lakish is trying to prove his point that he's saying that, okay, we're talking about that there's no etzem kisayra in this aver that doesn't have basar arucha that could regenerate. So why says Rish Lakish, am I saying it's going to be mitam magamas? He says because the Torah includes it. What is included? So this is the proof for Rish Lakish. Hay aver min ames. This that we just mentioned, the limb of a dead person, we said we included from Oiba Mes, we said Ze'iva Nechel Min HaMes. What's the case talking about? Says Rish Lakish, if it has a bone the size of a barley corn that you're saying, oh, it's going to have a tumah of Maga Masa, you already mentioned that it says in the Pasuk, Hanageh Be'etzim, that's Etzim Kisa'ira. So I wouldn't need to have a drasha of telling me, Eva Min HaMes, if it has Etzem Gisayra, which anyways only with having Tumah Maga Masa. Less by Etzem Gisayra, obviously because it doesn't have a bone the size of barley corn. And so the Torah is increasing it, including it, from a special word of Oibemes, because it's a complete Aver, even though it doesn't have Lahal Sarucha. Because again, if it had Lahal Sarucha, it would even have Tumas Oil. So you see like Rish Lakish, would tell you that no. La'olam de Ispe. Truth is it has a Etzem Gisayra. Now, and if it's not teaching you right anything regarding the halacha of maga, because that you know from a hanegea be'etzem. Now, when it says etzem, it says negeya be'etzem. So you're right. It's coming to teach you that a bone the size of barley corn will be matame even with masa, because touching you know from hanegea be'etzem, but it says negeya. So here, when I'm talking about an avrim in a mess, it's including it, even though it has the etzem kisayra, and I know that, but I know I'm touching. I wouldn't know with masa. Now, I tell you, it's a little bit difficult because if that's the case, why is the Brisa saying oy b'meis is ivra nechel min hameis, and it has a bone the size of barley corn? Just say zu etzem kisayra. Why would you have to say it's including it? It's not really about the Aver Minames. It doesn't have Lahal Zarucha, and you tell me it doesn't. It's only because Rabbi Yechon is teaching you. It's only because of the Etzem Kisayra. It's not a win time. So why are you saying it's Aver? You should really just say, okay, that is a little bit of a difficulty. Thank you any time. Those things.